Go live. All right. It says we're live. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to our broadcast. I'm Mark Graban, joined by my friend
Katie Anderson. So happy to be here and celebrating books and the completion of some goals.
And it's going to be fun doing that today. So let's introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Mark Graban. One thing we're celebrating today is my new book released about 2 weeks ago called The Mistakes That Make Us: Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. Katie, thank you for your endorsement of the book. Thank you for holding up your copy as well that I signed and sent over to you. Katie, tell us about your book. And it's not new, but there's a milestone.
Well, there are two there are milestones and an honor. So I'm Katie Anderson. I am a leadership coach, author, speaker, and consultant. And my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, Lessons from Toyota Leader Isao Yoshino on a Lifetime of Continuous Learning, just celebrated less than a week ago its third anniversary since its publication. And at the same week, we announced that I had been awarded the Shingo Publication Award for the book. And so I'm really thrilled at that honor and celebrating the milestone together. So it's really exciting. And Mark has been such an incredible supporter of my authorship journey. And so it's been great to support him this time around with his new book.
Well, thank you, Katie. And again, congratulations, not just on the 30-year anniversary of an excellent book, but on the Shingo-Award recognition. That's really exciting. Really happy for you here. So we want to invite people. We see some comments coming in here. So great, that connection is working. We have really kind of one agenda item, daruma related. And then I think if there are questions coming in from people, we will do our best to address those. So I want to say hi. I see Mark, Enrique, Abisola. Thank you for the hellos and the congratulations. So the main thing, and I thought this was important to have Katie here with me, is the completion of filling in the second eye of this daruma doll, which was given to me by Katie. I filled in the first eye of the daruma when I started this project, The Mistakes That Make Us, back in March of last year. But Katie, I was wondering if you could share a little bit more background, or the story of what a daruma doll is and what I've done so far and what I'm going to be doing next.
Yes. So when I lived in Japan in 2015 and 16, I was introduced to daruma dolls, and they are these paper mache dolls. These are the small ones that Mark and I are holding up, but I don't know, you can see some of my daruma collection behind me. I have some very large ones. Yeah. They're paper mache, and they are weighted at the bottom. And so if you knock it over, it'll right itself back up. And they represent the process it takes to complete a goal. So there's a Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And so you're invariably on the way to completing a goal. You're going to be knocked over, fall down, have setbacks, challenges along the way. But the important thing is to get back up and keep moving forward. And so the way these dolls are visual representations of a goal is when you have a goal, you can see how the doll's eye is blank. You fill in the pupil, like here, of the doll's left eye, and then it sits and looks at you and topples over and gets back up until you complete your goal. And when you complete a goal or a challenge or an intention, then you can fill in the doll's right eye, and it is fully there. So Mark and I are going to fill in some goal eyes. And so Mark, I gifted this doll to Mark when he was starting this book writing project. And so he was like, oh, I'd have to fill in the doll's eye. So go, Mark. Let's, and I put a little, when I was setting out and applying for the award, I had a little Shingo doll as well. So we have some darumas we can fill in. So
we each have one to complete.
And
is there a particular reason why the left eye is filled in first, or just tradition?
No, I'm not sure exactly what the significance of that is, but all the literature I read about darumas say the left eye. I'm sure that there is something behind that, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean your goal is not good.
Standard process and tradition.
Yeah. There we go.
We are willing to respect and follow the way it's supposed to be done.
Now, the Japanese burn their darumas at the end of the year when they bring them to temples and like the Daruma temple that I take people to on my Japan study tour. And in January, they light a massive bonfire, but I haven't been able to let go of any of my Daruma dolls. But I'm getting such a large collection. I may need to bring some with me in October to the Daruma temple. So there we go. Yay.
So they're painted, but like you said, they're paper mache. They will burn.
They will burn. And like you could crush this and it will disintegrate. There's actually a hole if you pulled away the sticker at the bottom. And they put, I actually have some great photos. They put sticks on these. So they're all done on sticks, and then they dip them into the paint, and so they're in a mold. There's a whole process. I've gone to some of the Daruma craftsmanship factories where they have all the Darumas in different processes. Now these ones, and it's really hard to paint Darumas. I actually went to a Daruma. This is another Daruma I had that I bought it with a blank face, and I had to paint on the black. It's really, really, really hard. So these are true crafts people who do the painting. Mine looks a little shoddy here, but because you're using the calligraphy ink and pens that they have, or brushes, not easy. So,
well, even just taking a Sharpie to the eye here, and I'm futzing with it and trying to make it a little bit more round, but you don't realize it's paper mache until you press with the pen. Only it's sort of absorbing. In sort of it's a little soft like paper when you push on it.
They're really light. I mean,
they are. But when you bring a suitcase full of them back from Japan, it helps that they're light.
Yes. I mean, I'm holding it with one hand. This is the big one. It also says, this one was custom made for me. It says Shiko or intention. But there, this one's bigger than my head. Yes. No, I bring back hundreds every time I come back to the US because I love to give them away to people like Mark, or people come to my workshops as visual reminders of the goals they want to set. So there you go. My big collection. So I'm so thrilled. And next time I see you, Mark, I have to give you another one because, we all have ongoing goals. But right now it's enjoy the goal of the completion of your book. That is so huge. And I highly recommend people check out Mark's book and his podcast that inspired the book. There's so much rich learning in here about how the mistakes really truly make us, because we do fall down, and it's about the process of getting up. And there's always challenges that we have. It's easy to see the success or the output of others, but it's all the things behind that. And when we can really embrace that for ourselves as individuals, and then create those cultures where it's okay to make mistakes. And, of course, we don't want catastrophic failure, but how do we have other processes where it's okay to be learning along the way and look at the process and not blame the people? Yeah. So,
and, I'll try to point people to Katie's episode. Well, she was on My Favorite Mistake twice. So I want to talk about each of those. The second time Katie was on was to talk about her audiobook production process. And I'll mention real quickly, I went into a studio, recorded the audiobook version of The Mistakes That Make Us. That'll be available, I think, in a couple of weeks. I don't have an exact release date for that. But I did learn, part of me was tempted to just record it at home. I have a good enough microphone, and was working with a audio engineer that was going to do the editing. And I decided, I think partly on your guidance, to go to the studio. A little bit extra cost, but I thought it's more likely we could do it right the first time, meaning somebody was listening and telling me if I didn't notice I flubbed up a word, making a mistake, and I made plenty. There were the ones I noticed, and then there were the ones where Jeff had to say, okay, wait a minute, Mark, you botched that word. You said the wrong thing or whatever. But you shared your audiobook journey in that second episode of the podcast. How would you summarize that for folks?
Well, first, it's like literally the anniversary of my discovery of that mistake was this week. So this is a fitting time that we're talking about it. So I released the audiobook version of Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn in the book's 1-year anniversary. And the summary was, it was only after the production, it was released into the world, that I discovered through some listeners giving me feedback that parts of the audiobook, the sound quality was not very good. And it all had passed Audible's sound quality. So it wasn't egregiously terrible. Maybe something, kind of a grainy podcast that you listen to, but not the quality I wanted for my listeners for of an audiobook. So, and and there's all, you can go listen to the podcast to really understand all the things that happened that led to those mistakes, and then the challenges I had about how to respond to them, right? But ultimately, I was recording also sort of in the pandemic time when, I actually didn't have childcare, and it was not easy access to going to a studio. When I was doing the recording, we weren't even a year into the pandemic. But that time I was like, okay, so I have two options. We realized we couldn't fix it because the native audio files just were not of the right quality for certain sections. And so I had two options, right? I either accepted the quality and that was that, or I needed to find out a different way. And so I found a studio. I went back in, I re-recorded the entire thing, which, as you know, Mark, is not like, I mean, my book's a lot more words than yours. So it was 80,000 words. But it was really important to me to have a high quality product for my listeners, for my customers. And so I went in and did that. So we got that up. So there's about a 6-week lag between the book coming out, discovering the mistake, and then the new version being able to come up. But it's you. And so I'm glad also that you are able to learn from my mistakes. So that's part of the reason why we also need to create a culture where it's okay to talk about mistakes. We don't hide that, because not only we can learn from them ourselves, but we can pass on some of those learnings. So it's like, how terrible would it be if you repeated the same thing? I actually had a really good sound system set up, but what the error ultimately ended up being is you couldn't easily see whether or not the input for the microphone was from my high quality mic or from my laptop. And then, you go listen to the podcast episode and everyone, and then you can get all the nitty gritty. But that was one of the issues. So get it done right. And I'm so excited for your audiobook to be coming out to the world too.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I did put a link in the LinkedIn chat, episode 128. So you can go to markgraban.com/mistake128. My book's right about 50,000 words. Yeah. And I think it was 10 hours of recording time. Now, that wasn't 10 hours straight of talking, because there would be pauses, there would be breaks. I think it's going to be 6 hours of audio, but there were many there, and I blogged about this. I mean, there were different types of mistakes. There were the reading mistakes that I would make. You just sometimes just botch a word, and so you go back and re-record, and that audio engineer has done the editing and will stitch things together. I don't know how it was for you, Katie, but as I was going through, even after professional copy editing, professional proofreading, many eyes on the book. It was the first time maybe the first time I really ever read it truly word for word from beginning to end, as it was, finalized. And there was on average like one little mistake per chapter that I would notice as I was reading, and I would take notes. Like, okay, we're going to change that in the audio. Then I'm going to go back and update the book to match. So the beauty of on-demand printing and Kindle is that I could go update the Kindle version. I could go update the print books, upload a new file. There's not a warehouse or a garage full of books with some of these small typos. And hopefully that didn't detract from the early reading experience. The reviews didn't say, hey, it was full of typos, because it wasn't.
No.
But there's always mistakes.
And a lot of people won't even see them because they weren't even, our brains fill in. I had the same experience, and it was a year after my book came out. So we caught a few typos in the beginning. It's just incredible how many come through. But even when I was reading, I'm like, oh, there was still even some that weren't caught. And then you also realize you might have written a clunky sentence or two. You're like, this seemed fine. But now that I'm trying to speak this out loud, was a whole nother thing. But then you're like, I can't go back and change that, because then it's like, let it be. It's okay.
I think there are two things. One is, why did I word it that way? And then sometimes something that I think flows fine when you're taking it in with your eyes is a little clunky to be said out loud.
I agree. And, when you're writing a book and you're so immersed in it, you've read every word so many times, and your editors and proofreading, you stop having perspective. And people did say, oh, you should read the whole thing out loud. But, oh my God, it's so hard. And then even to read it and it's different to read it when you're reading it for, the audiobook, because you want to be really animated like we are now, and, read with read in an engaging way. But yes. So
Well,
there are mistakes that make us, but the books are still great, and hopefully not too many mistakes.
yeah. The other thing that was really beneficial to having an audio engineer giving live feedback was giving feedback on when I should stop reading for the day. So I did about 4 hours on one day, and there was with a lunch break, then 4 hours the next, and then an hour and a half that final day to wrap it up. And he would say, okay, and your voice is sounding different now. Not hugely different, but if someone, you like, okay, fine, we'll go back. And we had planned on that going across a couple of days. But now here's the other level of mistakes. There were the mistakes I made, and I'm not blaming Jeff, that Jeff didn't catch, that I didn't catch. Yeah. Now I am going to have to go back to the studio. It's not going to take very long, but a couple little cleanup things to fix the mistakes that were made. And then hopefully nothing reaching the ear of the audiobook buyer.
Yes. Well, not like mine. So that was like, I can't tell you how my heart sank when that happened. Yeah. But
I wasn't gloating or picking.
The situation. Yeah.
I wasn't meaning to gloat or pick on you that you.
No, but you learned from my mistake. And so that makes me so happy, Mark. You didn't repeat my mistake.
And you were doing this during pandemic times to be kind to yourself about, you were doing your best given circumstances, for sure. So here we have a couple of things we can talk about. There was a question that came in. I made a mistake. I was trying to copy and paste the question, clicking on StreamYard. I'm kind of new to this. We make mistakes when we're new to something. Me playing host on StreamYard. So there's a question that came in from Eduardo that had popped up on screen briefly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that question up again here. And he says, after 40 plus years, says in Eduardo's words, most CI, continuous improvement, or Kaizen strategies keep being wrongly deployed and unsustainable. What do you think that we keep missing and keep doing something wrong when implementing CI Kaizen? It's hard to know if it's some, many, most, or what degree struggle. But I don't know. I mean, like to at least give an answer. Like this is a rich question that we could do a whole session on. But do you have a thought that comes to mind? At least one thing that trips or slows people.
Yeah, so the thing that comes immediately, this is a rich topic. But something I've been really reflecting on is some comments that Mr. Yoshino made on my recent Japan study trip when we were having conversations about how Toyota has been able to be successful. And again, it goes back to its attitude towards learning, as I describe in the book. But he kept talking about leaders being serious. And by serious, he doesn't mean but he means committed, like truly serious about creating a culture of continuous improvement, serious about their role in leading that, of engaging with that, of going to Gemba, not just words on a wall or saying, oh yeah, we need to do some Kaizen events, but that they're truly committed and serious about how to enable this to make it happen. And so I think in my perspective, a lot of the challenges we have with doing Kaizen in our organizations, that we see it as a Kaizen event, or we see it as a project or tools, which are all helpful as getting started or as ways to do improvement. But if it's not really embedded in the actions each and every day from people, doing the frontline value creation work to the executives and how in their role in it, then it really won't be sustainable. So that seriousness, that committedness is what I see as one of the biggest gaps in a lot of companies where it's not really working.
Yeah. I think a lot of that is really true. The different pitfalls that you touched on of thinking, equating Kaizen to only meaning Kaizen events, I think is a pitfall. And there's nothing, I'm not saying Kaizen events are bad, but I think it works best when it's in the context of events, projects, A3s, and especially small daily, Kaizen improvements. Masaki Amai, who passed away recently, certainly championed these different levels of Kaizen, and organizations like Toyota and others embrace that. I think one other thing I was going to point out, it comes back to Mr. Yoshino, who of course was the main focus and subject of your book, Katie, and he's a small piece of my book, because the first time you were on the My Favorite Mistake podcast was with Mr. Yoshino together, episode 30. He told the story from his early days at Toyota, Japan, 1960s. There's a version of that story in my book, The Mistakes That Make Us. And, hearing, other people I've interviewed on the podcast, David Meyer, who started at Toyota in the 80s in Kentucky. Mr. Yoshino's story and David Meyer's story were so similar in terms of making a mistake, wrong chemical being loaded into a machine, and instead of being blamed and punished for what was arguably, I think factually, a systemic problem, they were supported. Management, if anything, apologized to them for putting them in a position where that mistake was possible. The focus was on learning. And so back to Eduardo's question, I think one of the things that trips organizations up is when they're focused on teaching tools, training people, doing events, but without that underlying culture of learning from mistakes leads to a culture of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And I think a foundation for that, as I explore in the book, is this foundation of psychological safety. And I think Toyota is an example of a company that not just talks about psychological safety, but really, you can see the evidence of it, like reaching up and pulling the andon cord or speaking up with an idea, pointing out problems, admitting mistakes. That all requires a level of psychological safety and a constructive, supportive problem-solving approach. So I wish organizations would embrace that part of Lean or TPS.
Yeah, totally. Bob just put in a great question here as well at the bottom. Can we highlight that?
Yes. So I'll put that up and read that. A question for you, Katie. Thanks again for this, Bob. You clearly highlight Mr. Yoshino's actions of self-understanding. Is this common among other Japanese leaders you've worked with, or is it still a unique trait specific to him? See here, there's a reading mishap like I had doing the audio.
No, it's hard. We're not used to reading out loud anymore. So thanks for the question, Bob. Really good one. The concept of hansei, which is a Japanese word representing self-reflection, is really pervasive across Japanese society as a whole. So this concept of introspection, reflection, looking within is something that is more embraced in that society. Now, of course, it doesn't mean every Japanese leader is very good at it, but certainly the process of hansei, of looking within, is something that is taught through kids at an earlier age. And so this concept of self-reflection and introspection and looking inward is something that's more pervasive. Now, whether or not they do something with those actions or not is different. And I did experience Mr. Yoshino is incredibly good about this. And I think this also comes through his willingness to be open and transparent and humble and share with others, and to be able to go there because we had mutual respect. And he also knew that I would treat his stories with respect as well. So, I think sometimes the concept of hansei or self-reflection is also attached with sort of like self-blame or like, what did I do wrong? But wait, he's been able to do that is, how can I do things differently? How can I do things better? What was my process? And a lot of the Japanese leaders that I have engaged with, and particularly through my time living in Japan, and now there I take the leaders of companies that I take people to on my Japan study trips, are of leaders of a similar ilk. It's people always reference how impressed they are about the humility of these leaders to really share the challenges that are going on in their organization and what they're trying to do to really be serious and be committed to create the cultures and the outcomes that they want to see, not just for their business, but for their people as well. So, but there's variability, of course, in Japan, as there is in any country as well. Yeah.
A mistake to think all Japanese companies are exactly like Toyota.
No, and they are not. My husband was working, so we moved to Japan for my husband's job, and he was in Tokyo, and he was like, "This is not the culture that I'm used to, or the other people I knew." So Toyota has been able to create a different type of culture, and a lot of it's more like that countryside or that family business element versus as Mr. Yoshino say, the city slickers. They have just a different attitude towards leadership as well.
And that culture of, again, like, I think cultivating a level of psychological safety where people feel safe admitting mistakes. I'm actually broadcasting today. I should have mentioned, I'm at the KaiNexus office in Austin, Texas, where we've been meeting as a company the last couple of days. And as I highlight in the book, completely accurate to describe a culture here of learning from mistakes. And you can tell there's that safety where people admit mistakes in different settings. The reaction to it is kind and focused on learning. It's constructive.
Yeah. Instead
of mocking somebody or getting upset or focusing on that punishment. It's hard. There's a question from Tim here. How do you handle an environment where mistakes are punished, where people say things, you should have planned better, you should have seen this coming? I'm curious to see, like with my book, I'm trying to make the case that the punitive approach is counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many people I can really convince of that if they're already convinced that punishment is somehow necessary. Mm-hmm. Like, if I don't punish people, they're going to make more mistakes. I don't think that's really how it works. I think people get better at hiding mistakes. So how do you, back to Tim's question of how you handle that? It's hard to handle. People handle it by keeping quiet, hiding their mistakes, and that's not good for the organization. So I'm hoping in some way the stories of leaders in my book helps open people's eyes, if they're on the fence about it anyway, that we can try this more non-punitive approach.
Absolutely. And one of the case studies in my book, Mr. Yoshino was intimately involved in, the NUMI, the transformation that happened from one of GM's worst performing plants, where mistakes were hidden, they were punished, there was a really combative, it's just a bad environment that was very, very punitive. And then through the partnership with Toyota, became over the course of 1 year with this joint venture, became the top performing, plant as well. And people were contributing and thriving because they were being responded to in a different way and supported in a different way. And so it shows we can make a really direct influence on the outcome of our products and our services through creating a different environment for our people.
Yes. So I think we're going to try to close by the end of at the bottom of the hour. We've got 2 more questions. Maybe we can touch on them briefly and we can get more responses in the chat. But question from Eric to me: how can we address a mistake when the mistake is not recognized? One example, process behavior charts. I love the topic here. In that context, one example is treating specification limits as action limits. Another is treating common cause variation as special cause. So I point people to my previous book, Measures of Success. But more directly to Eric's question, I think there are knowledge-based mistakes where we just don't know to do the right thing. And then there are execution mistakes where we know what to do, but we slip up in some way. So I think when there's a knowledge-based mistake, we can try to close a knowledge gap. If they think they're doing the right thing by putting specification limits or goals or targets on a chart, you can try to educate people and try to make them aware of the mistake, and hopefully do so in a way that doesn't trigger defensiveness. If they're not in a culture of psychological safety where it's safe to make a mistake or to admit that you were wrong or that you didn't know something, sometimes people double down on the mistake, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. Both. And Holly made a great comment here that you can't make the assumption that leaders understand how to lead and the behavior is attributed to leadership. And in the comments, I'm posting a recent article I wrote for Industry Week, really about how you're a leader now. You have to forget everything you've learned, because the things that led to us being promoted are actually not the things that make us effective people leaders and managers as well. So that can be a real challenge for folks when we're stepping into leadership roles, and it's hard. But if we pay attention to that, we can do something different.
Yeah. And I'll just mention one other thing. I put a link to the episode of My Favorite Mistake that had both Katie and Mr. Yoshino into the chat. You can go to markgraban.com/mistake30. Katie, thank you for adding the chat. Maybe we'll end on this question for Mark Harris. Katie and I have both worked in different capacities in healthcare organizations. There's a broader question around the question here, but Mark says, I'm helping the executive leadership team implement department huddle boards at 270 departments across a hospital system. How do you convince executive leaders they need to proceed cautiously and not rush patients? So I kind of emphasize a couple of words there. Like, I don't know if you convince, right? So, I mean, I think in a situation like this, you may have dueling hypotheses, if you will, where there's one hypothesis that says, well, there are benefits to these huddle boards. We know they're going to be great. Therefore, rolling them out sooner than later is better. Let's do it all at once, and that's going to work. I probably wouldn't share that hypothesis. I would probably state a hypothesis that it's better to start small, try things out, do a pilot, set up your PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust cycles, learn from any mistakes or challenges in the first departments and learn from that, and then try to go more broadly. I don't know if you can convince, right? I mean, you're going to have to discuss it. What do you say, Katie?
Well, I've been in your not exact same position, but a very similar role when I was the director of the lead promotion office at a very large healthcare system in California. Before 10 years ago was when I left. We had a similar challenge. Like, we wanted to really create a lean management system across the hospital, and we did start small in a select department and function, and then started to spread. But people were learning about this and they wanted it across the system. One of the things that we were trying to work with our executive team, and we had a great lean leader who was a COO who had come from a hospital system where so he had experience. But there was a certain point where we didn't want to stop the enthusiasm, but we didn't want to implement boards across the system, because boards are a tool that if you put it up and you're not using the behaviors aren't supporting it, then it actually has the opposite impact, because then people are like, that didn't work. That was dumb. Like, that was actually bad. And so how do you help your leadership team talk about and understand that it has to be part of leadership behaviors? And so how are they going to connect with that and make sure that they're supporting those leadership behaviors across the system? Because otherwise it's going to have a negative impact. But, if they want to experiment with putting some boards up and using it, you also don't want to squash the enthusiasm, but kind of pushing it out across the system, like a standard board, is probably going to have a negative impact. So again, I would go back to what Mark said, is like, you can't convince a leadership team, but I think it's helping hold up the mirror to them of, what would they think would be the impact if something happened, and what is their commitment? And if they want to do that, then what must be true? One of my favorite questions from the Playing to Win framework, what must be true for that to have the outcome or the impact that they really want? And then work backwards into what does that really look like?
Yeah. Like, do we know doing 270 boards at once will work, or are we assuming or predicting? What would have to be true for that to be successful? Because I've visited organizations where they put up the boards everywhere, and months later they were empty.
No,
right. So then that's a different, hopefully, plan, do, study, adjust cycle. Instead of saying we put the boards out, people aren't using them, therefore it didn't work, as opposed to asking, well, why? What's the barrier? Is it a lack of psychological safety? Are people afraid to point out things and put them on the board? Is it a fear factor, or do they just think like, well, I could speak up, but nothing happens? A futility factor. But either way, hopefully organizations are willing to plan, do, study, adjust, instead of giving up too quickly, whether it's huddle boards or any new thing they're adopting.
Yeah. Well, and also to come back to what is the outcome you're trying to get through the implementation of this tool or process, and what are the behaviors that are going to support the success? Because it ultimately comes back, how are we engaging with things rather than just doing the tool? So hope that helps you, Mark, and some others as well. So
well, there's a comment here that Elisa gave a little validation for what he's dealing with. And Mark, feel free to reach out to either or both of us if you want to have a longer conversation about that important question or that situation you're facing. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Katie, thank you for joining me to do the session today to complete the Daruma doll. Thank you again for that gift. Congratulations again on the 3rd anniversary of your book, if you'll hold it up, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn.
Yes.
And congratulations again on the Shingo-Award and the great honor that is. And thank you again for your kind endorsement and support of my new book,
Yes.
The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. So glad we could get together and fill out, complete our Daruma dolls, kind of celebrate some milestones and have a good chat. So as always, it's fun talking with you, Katie. Thank you for
absolutely. And thanks everyone for joining us live and for your questions. If you're listening to the recording, put your comments and questions in. Mark and I always try and go back and engage with those as well. So go get your copy of The Mistakes That Make Us, and go also check out Mark's podcast, or at least the episodes that I was on, to dive into some of those stories. And if you haven't already, dive into Mr. Yoshino's wisdom and the experiences about how you really create these cultures of learning and continuous improvement. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.